Hey guys, it's Britt Hartley with a heavy episode today on the 4 existential fears. I'm an atheist spiritual director. I used to do the majority of my coaching for religious deconstruction, and now the majority of my coaching is with people in nihilism or existential crisis. And here's the thing, nihilism, the abyss, would maybe be manageable if it weren't for the monsters that live there. So today we're going to meet the 4 monsters that lurk in the deep. And this is going to be working off of Irvin Yalom, who was an existential psychiatrist and who noticed that traditional therapy wasn't meeting these deep existential concerns that lie at the root of people's issues. So he laid out the 4 ultimate concerns in his book, Existential Psychotherapy, showing how these 4 things shape human anxiety and our search for meaning. And so he was one of the rare psychoanalysts who was working with people in deep philosophical questions about the meaning of life. And he found that people were usually afraid of these 4 things. So the 4 fears are fear of death, fear of freedom, that one takes some time to explain, fear of isolation, and fear of meaninglessness. And it wasn't until I met the existential fears for myself personally that I finally understood why religions and political religions and cults and organizations exist in the first place. We crave structure and gurus and institutions and 12-step paths in order to access the soothing security blankets and anchors they provide, because these are the dangers of too much chaos. When we have too much chaos, we're just kind of left naked and open to these 4 monsters without any way to cope. So let's start with the first one that makes the most sense, which is the fear of death. And so death brings you face to face with your own existence, and it is a major source of our anxiety, even if we don't think that we're thinking about it. It's this dark, unsettling presence at the rim of our consciousness. And so one of the developmental tasks that we learn as children is how to soothe ourselves from death. And in some ways, religion may have been created when we became smart enough to realize that we were going to die. That is when we get the first whispers of rituals in early humans where we're burying people with elements that have use for the living, but we're leaving them with the dead. So something that a live person could use, but we start to leave them with the dead. And so almost everyone experiences a fear of mortality. The impact of this fear on human cognition and actions has been extensively explored through terror management theory studies. And it's fascinating to see what people do when we subconsciously remind them that they're going to die and how their brains deal with it. So we create stories that allow us to conquer death. This is one of the ways that we deal with it. Some people think that there's no atheists in foxholes or no atheists on their deathbeds, but when we look at the data, it shows that it's the other way around. Religious people subconsciously compartmentalize death with their stories, but when it's actually time to die, all this repressed fear and doubt comes to the surface. So you're more likely to get a scared Christian on their deathbed than an atheist who suddenly wants to get baptized. Another way, so when we're creating religious stories, we're cheating death. Another way that we cheat death is symbolic immortality. So even for non-religious people, symbolic immortality helps people manage death anxiety. So this is like leaving a legacy with your creative work, with your kids, with your achievements. This could be nationalism or group identity. You want to be a part of a group that is bigger than you, that continues after you. One great example of this is if you have Christians and Jews come to a church for an event and you just let people into the chapel, they will just kind of sit all together and they'll start talking to their neighbor and they'll start mingling. But if before you let them in, you show them a video kind of before they get into the chapel, and this video reminds them essentially that they're going to die. And once you do that and put that thought into their brain, when they go into the chapel, the Christians will sit with the Christians and the Jews will sit with the Jews. And you can actually measure that these people sit further apart from people who are other than them because you have been subconsciously reminded that you're going to die. And whenever we do that, we want to be like, our tribalism really amps up. We want to be with the people that are us because we actually, and this is very tricky that this is all happening underneath our conscious attention, but we are subconsciously symbolically trying to cheat death by being a part of a group that is bigger than us. So it may be that in all of our religious driven wars, we haven't just been fighting one another. Like, people think that if we just stopped having religion, we would just stop having these religious wars. But the reality is we've been fighting death itself. That's what we've been fighting. And so when we have these religious wars and we really want our side to win and our God to be the best and our culture to continue, it's partly because we really want to have this symbolic immortality where we are part of something that is bigger than us, that lasts longer than us, and then that gives us life, gives our life more meaning. And so we've been trying to maintain our own group's survival, because if we don't, our lives become meaningless in the footnotes of history. So another thing that we do is values and beliefs. So we'll feel connected to eternal principles that last longer than us. So if we remind judges that they're going to die, they will actually give out harsher sentences, because the law is the thing that's going to outlive them, and they are part of the law. And they don't know if they're doing that. If you ask them, why did you give such harsh sentences today? They will give totally rational reasons. But at the root of that, we know from the Hungry Judge study and from terror management studies that if you remind judges that they're going to die, they're going to give harsher sentences, because they're going to attach their symbolic immortality to the concept of the law. And if they're hungry, they're also going to give harsher sentences, because empathy takes a lot of energy in the brain. And so if you're hungry, you're just less likely to feel empathy. And so they don't know that they're doing that. If you ask them, even if you tell them about these studies, they will still feel like there's rational reasons for what they're doing, which is fascinating. So according to all of these terror management theory type studies, what we do, pursuing careers, seeking fame, having children, aligning with strong belief systems, getting involved in some kind of political religion, this is all an unconscious attempt to assure that we live on beyond our death. It's a way that our brain is coping with the fact that we're going to die. And then another thing that we do when we are reminded that we're going to die is that we just distract ourselves. So it's funny that sometimes we can distract ourselves so well that we forget that people die. Like, people will genuinely be surprised that people die, because it's compartmentalized so well, and we have endless distraction from social media and work and consumerism. It's like when Mycroft says in Sherlock, every single one of us is dying. Why should it be a surprise when someone actually dies? But we actually get so good at distractions that we forget, and it truly is a surprise to our conscious attention. So terror management theory and Irvin Yalom's work on fear of death tell us that our fear compels us to embrace belief systems, religious stories, anything that can safeguard our self-worth and our significance and our enduring presence, enabling us to perceive ourselves as integral to existence and to the story of humanity. We literally write stories to feel special enough to justify our lives, because it is too hard psychologically to be functional in society when you are constantly thinking about the fact that you're going to die and the universe doesn't care. So it's as if our subconscious is trying to shield us from the profound dread of a seemingly inconsequential life that will eventually succumb to death. And so in nihilism, these tools to face death that we have used in the past, like religious stories or political religions or a legacy, those things don't work anymore. You can't believe in a magical story anymore. You're too skeptical now. And even when you talk about legacy, like having children or creating some business or foundation, this planet is eventually going to blow up or collide with the Andromeda galaxy, and no one will know that we're here at all. So what was even the point of that legacy? This is where I meet people who have to try and function in a life where they have no buffer between them and death, death breathing down their neck at all times. And so there's a reason we subconsciously developed ways to not think about it, because we're not very productive when we are looking death in the face at all times, at least not at first. But this is the good news. Psychologists who formulated terror management theory and Yalom also discovered the benefits for when we grow to look death in the eye. So death can become if we look at it without blinking, it can become a friend who bears gifts of focusing on our life, for focusing our life on what we really want it to be about. This is the message. I'm a millennial. I'm going to quote Harry Potter. It is the message in the death of the Harry Potter characters Dumbledore and Sirius and Lupin and Snape, that to live well is to look death in the eye with courage and something to fight for, as opposed to Voldemort, who is fighting his own mortality and seeking ways to cheat death, until at the end of the book, Harry learns the lesson and meets death like an old friend. And so often our capacity to look death in the eye will grow over time. Maybe we lose our faith in a specific religion, but we dive headfirst into near-death experiences in order to try to hold on to some belief in an afterlife. I see this with a lot of my clients. Then maybe we hold on to our children as something that's keeping us immortal, or a desire to build a legacy that outlives us. There's that Hamilton quote that God help and forgive me. I want to build something that's going to outlive me. But death keeps knocking, keeps reminding us that as we lose friends and family among us, that these are only illusions of control. So while I cannot say for certain what happens after we die, it's my experience that people who seek immortality through one belief or another are still being driven by their fear of death. So true freedom comes when we embrace our mortality, when we face death, because it forces us to rearrange our life's priorities, to let go of expectations, to live more fully in the present, appreciate the simple joys of like the changing of seasons or Christmas. It helps us to communicate more honestly with our loved ones, share our love more often, take greater risks into our own authenticity. There's a lot of gifts that death kind of has for us if we can face it. So once I realized that I'm going to die, for me, every moment then became extraordinarily sacred. And the idea that I'm going to change my life because some person who's going to be worm food soon says some mouth noises at me, like, no, I'm going to die. Like, there's things that I want to experience, even if I get pushback from society. And now I'm more willing to take those big risks into that direction. So it's like exposure therapy with spiders. Like at the beginning, you're very afraid. And if you're working with a therapist, you'll just sit with a picture of a spider and you'll just kind of lower your nervous system response. And then there'll be a spider across the room and then maybe a spider next to you. And over time, you build up resilience to be able to walk through the world without being totally terrified all the time that there might be a spider nearby. And that actually gives you far more freedom than if you were always trying to find a way to escape the spiders. Next is fear of freedom. So while death is the most obvious of our ultimate concerns, freedom is perhaps the least obvious. It's usually assumed that freedom is just intrinsically desirable, but we actually are more likely to create a fear of freedom than embrace freedom. So on a small scale, this would be like being overwhelmed with the number of choices in a grocery store salad dressing aisle, and then being thankful for someone recommending their favorite one. On a grand scale, it's more like being so overwhelmed with the complexity of the world that we give our freedom to the first guru, dictator, demagogue, political religion, bandwagon religion in whatever form. And so we are susceptible to giving our freedom away to others who promise that they know the way for us. So why do we do this? It's because we're thrown into a world where we actually don't know anything and we truly can F up our lives and live with regrets. But also everyone disagrees on what you should do as a human. And so it's very confusing to be a human. It just is. So because of the overwhelming seriousness and importance of this task, people frequently flee from freedom and responsibility of determining your own path in life. So we like to think that prophets and kings take power, but the reality is that we give them power. If all cult leaders died today, all religious leaders, all political leaders died today, all the leadership died, we would recreate them tomorrow, because it's so much easier to give your moral compass and life to someone else who seems trustworthy than to accept that you are ultimately responsible for your own choices. And also that means that you're responsible for the consequences of those choices. So many philosophers in the 19th and 20th century predicted that as we move away from organized religions and their prescribed paths, that we would become prey to political religions that promise a similar story. Just give me your freedom, follow me, and I'll take you to utopia against the other side, which just trying to, make life worse for everybody. All we have to do is kill everyone who stands in our way or legislate everyone who stands in our way. So the events of the 20th century bears out that this fear was well founded. That is what we did. And so we long for a path that creates order out of chaos. We want community. We're wired to seek the silverback gorilla among us. We're easily swayed by confidence that masquerades as competence. And we are unbelievably willing to sell our freedom in exchange for someone who seems wiser than us or more confident than us to show us the way. Trump is just a great example of this, because if you actually look at the words that he's saying on any matter on foreign or domestic policy, you don't think this is the most wise person I've ever met. Like, truly, he understands the complexity of the situation. No, he's just very confident, and we are very swayed by confidence, because then it seems like this person is going to take us to some utopia that America could be. And so we are all susceptible to some degree to the power of, demagogues and political biases and institutions. And some atheists like to say that all babies are born atheists. And even though that's a cute little quip, it's not really correct. We may all be born atheists, but we are very quick to make religions. We're quick to superstition, and we're quick to follow leaders against other groups of people that we find threatening. And we are quick to find ways to soften our fear of freedom so that our brain can make quicker decisions. Like, brains prefer black and white to complexity, because complexity takes a lot more work and energy to make decisions. So the path to pursue here is really being honest with yourself in contemplation about the life that is most worth living for you, and realizing that there's no cavalry coming. There is no self-help book exists, including the one that I wrote, that gives you a step-by-step plan for how to perfectly design your life. There is no YouTube channel that it's going to save you. The only person who can craft your life is you. And so we have to decult by purposefully listening to information from the other side of the aisle. We have to see even experts as humans with weaknesses and biases. We have to resist giving our freedom away to others, even gods. To quote the great contrarian and freedom fighter Christopher Hitchens, how dismal it is to see present-day Americans yearning for the very orthodoxy that their country was founded to escape. So how silly are we to crave order in the form of Christian theocracy when our country was founded on the experiment that society is better without the pretense that God is running the show? And so the question to ask ourselves here is, what is scary for you about having to craft your own life? Who or what do you find yourself making into a profit? And we incrementally get better at that as we take small steps into our authenticity and power, because nobody is coming to save you, and nobody has a 12-step path for your perfect life. People have stories and inspiration, and they can put language to things and they can help you, but nobody has a path for your life. You do have to create that on your own and get over essentially the fear of having to do that by taking those small steps into authenticity. So the next one is fear of isolation. So what often comes after accepting freedom is loneliness. And this one is just always crushing. I have yet to meet a nihilist who isn't lonely to some degree. So when you accept that you have some amount of freedom to move and to act, you're also faced with the chilling realization that you are alone. Existential isolation is this idea that there's an unbridgeable gulf between you and any other person, because no one in the world fully knows what it's like to be you. Nobody is seeing the world like you do, not a single person. And so isolation is most potent when we're around people who cannot take off their masks because they don't know that they're wearing one. This would be like, dinner parties where everybody's peacocking. And this fear drives people to avoid the task of becoming an individual, and they would rather alleviate their feelings of loneliness by putting some kind of mask on and fitting in and conforming. But facing isolation is learning how to enjoy your own company. It's connecting to all the parts of you. It's connecting all the parts of you to the world by having outlets and people and projects and ideas that bring out different aspects of what is you. And you essentially learn how to be lonely until it's no longer scary. And that will eventually help you to deepen your vulnerability in friendships, because you're not pretending to be someone else in these relationships. And you can also break the illusion of isolation, because you realize that even though no one can fully understand what it's like to be you, we're still more deeply connected than we realize. So this is when I did theism for Lent. I had a friend who did atheism for Lent for 40 days, and I did theism for Lent. And as an atheist, I spent 40 days acting like fully that I believe in God. I said prayers, I read my scriptures, I thought about God. I put on as best I could, I'm going to be a believer for 40 days and see what happens. And I'm not going to like just critique it as I go and like put on my atheist voice that it's stupid. Like I fully gave myself to this process, and my friend also gave herself to the process so that we could see what happened. And the thing that really showed up for me was how good it feels to feel like there's somebody watching over you who cares about you, who understands you. Like spending 40 days after it'd been so long since I'd been in religion, really thinking that God saw that act of kindness and was like in heaven kind of going like this, proud of me, that because it was this unseen act of kindness or grace, that felt really good. Or in times of struggle, thinking that there's somebody who understands what I feel like and understands the complexity of this situation and that I'm trying. So that was kind of my, at the end of the 40 days, I realized that, yeah, there's a reason why we like to think that God's watching over us. It's because it helps us with this loneliness that we feel that maybe no one fully understands us. And then my friend experienced the opposite. So she was an atheist for 40 days, and she had to come face to face with her fear of isolation, that, oh my God, what if I really am on this planet and there is nothing that really cares, and I'm not gonna, she had a harder time because she had to face a lot of her fears that were driving her to be religious. And so she learned to have a lot more respect for atheists who try to live a good life, because she realized how hard it is when you don't have this God that you feel like you can always talk to and is talking back to you. So instead of hoping a God is watching and will someday, tell me he's proud of me, I just learned how to sit with myself and say that to myself on occasion. I can witness the universe within. I can witness my triumphs that no one sees. I can wipe my own tears. I can witness the pain. I can witness the growth and the joy of the good things in my life. If no one is witnessing me, you learn how to witness yourself. It's like that song at the end of Phantom of the Opera, and I always cry to this song. It's so... it just, as an Enneagram 4, it has that like sad melancholy that I'm drawn to. But at the end of Phantom of the Opera, the movie, there's this song that says you learn to be lonely. And then you can learn to be alone with others, together with others. Our next fear is the fear of meaninglessness. Now, this is the one that almost killed me. So usually one or two fears bother you more than others. Fear of freedom didn't bother me at all. Like, I have a punk rock heart. I could deal with that. But at some point when you realize that we're alone and we suffer and we die, then we start to ask, what is the point of this? What do I do with my life? And this compounds with real life problems, because choosing to live means that we also choose to live with poverty and climate change and suffering and abuse and prejudice and disabilities and all these kinds of painful realities. And so this concept is too big to unpack all at once. I'm going to be doing multiple videos on this, but multiple videos on meaninglessness and the meaning crisis. But just for today, know that this one almost killed me. The thought that I had at my lowest point was that there is no meaning to life. I'll be forgotten in 3 generations no matter what I do. The earth will blow up and no one will know that we were here. God isn't coming. We're just silly primates. We have no free will. And like, maybe I could have made peace with all of that and, just live. But then to be alive means that conscious creatures have to suffer. So even if I find a way to watch my little TV show or help someone or do something good, it's nothing compared to the amount of suffering in the world that I can't do anything about. And it's also built on violence, because in order for me to eat, things that don't want to die will die, maybe even painfully. And vegans don't get around this either. It's less suffering to live on a cow for a year than growing and harvesting and shipping avocados all around the world. Like, it's like when Russ Cole said, I tell myself I bear witness, but the real answer is that it's obviously my programming and I lack the constitution for suicide. So in this point in my nihilism journey, I was completely stuck. I didn't want to end my life because of my kids. I adopted children, so don't come at me about how did I bring a child into the world. I was afraid to bring life into the world even before I was a nihilist. But I also saw no reason for living because I'm just stuck in this evolutionary violent machine. And I was convinced that it's more moral to withdraw your consent from this universe that should have been better than this. And so, advice for meaninglessness takes two different approaches. So, first of all, you have the approach of lowering the stakes. Things don't have to ultimately be meaningful. A tree doesn't say to itself, "What is the point of me?" It just lives. Like maybe there doesn't have to be a point of life even to just experience being. You get this approach from books like The Sunny Nihilist or from Absurdism, where you collapse the need for ultimate meaning and you learn how to live life anyway while embracing just kind of the absurd humor of it all. And you're just here to experience existence. Why does your life have to matter a million years from now? You essentially lower the stakes. So a lot of advice on meaninglessness is to just lower the stakes. The second approach is to build up your meaning intentionally. So this would be like existentialism, Viktor Frankl, John Vervaeke, or even the overman concept from Nietzsche that says, okay, there's no ultimate meaning. So then we have an opportunity to create meaning, to live a truly authentic life and carve our own path. We can create meaning from the ground up by living according to our values, finding meaningful projects that matter in the world, creating art, making the world a better place, and essentially saying that if this life is a ride that ends, I'm going to design it so that it's a ride worth taking. It's a life worth living. It's a movie worth watching, even though it ends. And this thought really saved me, that I didn't know how good life could get if I lived it truly authentically and took big risks in that direction. I didn't know what that life would be. I didn't know what kind of life would be worth experiencing. And so long as I hadn't tried that yet, that kind of radical living, there was hope that life could be better. And that was like, I didn't know if it was true yet, but it was that little glimmer of hope that I needed to start trying something new that would help me out of meaninglessness. And so I chose the things that made life worth living for me. Deep conversations, a few friends, my family, reading and writing, my little shows, my TikTok, which is essentially a journal of things that I'm thinking about that day, rabbit holes that are interesting to go down, being an atheist spiritual director because it's the job that I most wanted to do. I wanted to work people and do deep inner work with people, but not have to tell people that they have to go back to God in order to do that. I wanted to do that even though there was no career path. I made it up and I took a risk to do so. And then when things fail, you just lower the stakes. I remind myself that I'm just a meat suit flying through space on a space rock. These stakes aren't that high because we're all going to die. We're just here to experience being. And so with these elements that are part of my body, it's my turn to experience being and existence, and then my turn ends. We do both at the same time. There's lots of tools for meaninglessness that helps us lower the stakes and get over our pride that we're the center of the universe. And there's tools for building meaning up by choosing the game that you want to play, choosing causes that matter because you feel it in your very bones. And this does matter even if nothing else does, because it reduces the suffering for someone else's lived experience. And then you laser focus on that meaning and purpose so that even if you find out that a comet's going to hit the Earth a year from now, you wouldn't change anything because you're so focused on the game that you've chosen to play in this absurd world. And so I did notice, for example, I had a much harder time when Trump was first voted in. I had a much bigger emotional response and a sense of hopelessness. But this time, even though I had a lot of clients in an absolute spiral, I wasn't spiraling as bad. And I truly think it's because every corner of my life is built on my own meaning and purpose, regardless of what the world and the universe is doing. And so this is the tiny corner of the universe where I can reduce suffering, even if it doesn't matter in the end, but because it matters to that person and to me today. And so no matter what is going on in the world, I know what I can do. And I've focused on being a wounded healer in the way that I can, helping those in places where I most needed someone else because it mattered to me. And then processing my existential dread and crisis was really about naming the fears that were driving my anxiety so that I could kind of face these head on. And then once you have an enemy with a name, you could work with it. I could talk to it. I could read from others about how they made that enemy into a friend, because each enemy also carries gifts. Death taught me how to live. Meaninglessness taught me how to not take things too seriously, and also revealed to me what's worth fighting for, even if nothing else matters. Isolation isolation taught me to take social risks into vulnerability and also to be the person that I needed for myself and be in my own corner. And fear of freedom taught me that no one has the answer for how to live my life, which means that yes, I could absolutely fail, but I could also succeed in making a life so unique to me that no one else could live it like I can. So if you made it to the end of this video, my encouragement is to name your fear, get closer to it, because when we get closer to it and process it, that fear has gifts to give you. And then you don't have to be clinging on to stories or ideas or leaders or self-help books in order to function with life, because you've already faced the fear that actually bring those things into existence in the first place. And one of the best things about processing nihilism and existential fears is living to tell the tale. It's the amount of freedom that you experience, this radical freedom and living without fear. I faced the void that most people were too scared to look at. What could anyone do to me that I haven't done to myself? So there's deep pain here. I'm not going to lie. This almost killed me, facing your existential fears without a security blanket or a story. Most people don't do it. And also doing it without committing philosophical suicide, where you cling to the first story that comforts you. It's very painful. I know few people who have the stones for it, but it's also not just pain. There's also human resilience and freedom and compassion and witnessing and love and authenticity and bravery and beauty that comes from facing things that no one else will, and being big enough to hold the depths of human experience and also its heights. And so when enemies of the void become friends, you, like Nietzsche, throw a rose into the abyss for thanking the monsters who didn't succeed in swallowing you whole. So I want to show you one thing. Hold on. This is on my wall. A client made this for me, and he painted throwing a rose into the abyss to thank the monsters for not swallowing him whole. And when we had worked together in session, he was able to face his fears and eventually thank these monsters because they helped him to create a life that was worth living, that he didn't know how to do before, when he was just kind of living a life that society told him how to live. And so he painted this for me. It's one of my most cherished pieces on my wall over here that you can't see. And it's just lovely. It's just a lovely idea. So next week, we are going to be talking about mysticism. If you are stuck here, if you're like, these monsters are way too scary for me to look at, you need some help, you need some resources, I have lots of courses on this. I have a course on nihilism. I have a course specifically on death and death anxiety. And then I also take clients if you want to do one-on-one coaching. And then next week, we're going to be talking about the difference between mysticism and religion, and why mysticism is such a great tool in the modern world. So we'll explore that next week.